So my husband and I bought a townhouse back in September of 17, and we've had super weird things happen since then. Most of these experiences have happened on our second story. For background, where the stairs come up to my office is immediately to the left. Then there's a long hall to the right with the hallway bathroom. The laundry room is just past that. My son's room is on the other side, and the master bedroom at the very end of the hall. The access to the attic is in the master bedroom closet, and as our family goes, it's me, my husband, our son, and our 2 large dogs. When we first moved in, though, our son was only 2 to 3 years old and had just started making full sentences. He would be playing all day without any issues, but whenever it started to get dark outside, he started getting nervous and wouldn't want to be in his room. He had come downstairs at one point saying, "Mummy, do you hear it?" And I said, "Hear what, kiddo?" "The baby's crying, Mummy." My son is only a child, so you can imagine my confusion at this. I came upstairs with him and I asked him where he was hearing it from, thinking that he was hearing the neighbors through the walls or something. He took my hand and he pulled me towards the master bedroom, stopping just short of the threshold, and he pointed to the darkest corner of the room and said, "Over there, the baby is crying over there." My body went numb at this, but I tried to brush it off and told him that there was no baby and that he was just imagining it. This persisted for about a month, though, before he finally stopped talking about the crying baby. During this time, I had been doing research on our house, though, and there had been no deaths in the house that I could find, let alone any kids that had lived in the house before us. A few weeks after my son stopped mentioning the baby, though, I started hearing this scratching noise right above my bed in the attic. I told my husband, and he thought that we had a raccoon or some other animal in the attic. He went up a few days later, and there was nothing. I'm normally a heavy sleeper too, but at least twice a week I would wake up to a faint scratching noise right above me. I did my best to ignore it and just go back to sleep. This seemed to work, as we hadn't had any issues for a while up until recently. But I've always felt somewhat uneasy on the second floor. I just attributed it to my past paranormal experiences growing up and being a little bit paranoid. But now I'm thinking my senses were on point. A few months ago, my husband and I were talking about how our son had this weird affinity for the crying baby when he was younger, and I had mentioned that one day when I was taking a nap, I woke up abruptly to being sideways on the bed with one leg hanging off towards the closet, almost like I was being dragged towards it. However, I don't remember being pulled at all, and I do flop around a lot in my sleep, so I just sort of brushed it off. After I told my husband about this, though, he frowned a little bit and said that he had a weird experience too recently. Apparently, he woke up one morning around 2:30 or 3 and saw a figure standing by the side of his bed. He said that it was all black and he couldn't really make out a face or any distinct features. He went to kick the figure thinking somebody may have broken into the house, and his foot went right through the figure. This obviously freaked him out a bit, but he's a firm believer that if you don't acknowledge paranormal things, then they can't do anything. So, of course, he just rolls over and goes back to sleep and doesn't even think to mention it to me until I told him about my recent experience myself. The whole time we've been here too, the dogs will just randomly get spooked or will stare at something that I don't see. Every once in a while, our wolf hybrid, who is typically scared of his own shadow, will get very upset and his hair will stand on end and he'll emit a low but vicious growl. Our other dog is a Malinois Black Lab mix, but she's getting old, 10 years now, and doesn't really do much other than sleep on her bed and try to get all the pets and the treats from us. But this brings us to the present. So yesterday, there was a decent storm that came through in our area. It was semi-dark out and thunder every once in a while. I'm working from home due to the virus pandemic, and my mum had come to pick up my son around 11:30, so I can work in peace without my son continuously bothering me. A few hours later, though, I'm listening to a podcast while working, and I hear a faint mumble and almost sounded like Mummy. The chilling thing is that it sounded exactly like my son. I turn around to tell him that he needed to go back to his room and not to bother me while I was working, but As I was turning around, I remembered that he wasn't even home. I was here by myself with my dogs, and there was no one behind me and no one down the hall either. At this point, I try to brush it off, thinking that my mind must just be playing tricks on me, when my wolf hybrid starts losing it. All his hair goes up and he gets between me and the door and starts doing his low growl, and this freaked me out. But I told him to stop, which he listened, and he laid back down, but not without taking his eyes off of the hallway. About an hour later, I was in the zone with work and was talking with a co-worker in our team chat. They sent me something funny enough to make me audibly laugh, and I then heard a tiny giggle that sounded exactly like my son coming from his room down the hall, who still isn't home at this point, mind you. I nearly fall out of my chair at this point with how scared I was, and I got up and checked all the rooms upstairs, but I was definitely home alone, like I thought I was. I had to get back to work, though, as we were starting to get busy, but I was on edge and straining to hear if anything else was happening behind me. And about 10 minutes later, I hear the crash of something relatively small but still loud downstairs. My dog runs down the steps while I followed behind him because he heard it too. And my PlayStation controller, which was originally on the charging stand behind the TV, was now in the middle of the living room. This made my blood run cold, though, as we had not had anything physically move yet, and I had a full-blown panic attack at this. I called my husband, who was already on his way home, and said that he would be there soon. When he got home, everything seemed to stop, though. This all happened from about 2 to 4:30 p.m. in the middle of a little thunderstorm. I've looked into it, and from what I can gather, when something can mimic voices like that, it's typically evil or demonic, apparently. I don't know, though, guys. Should I be worried? What do I do in this situation? I don't want to scare my son, and we can't move, but I'm extremely paranoid now and scared to be home alone. Any help that you guys can offer is honestly really appreciated at this point. This happened 2 years ago in June or July in Poland, where we live. I got a call from my aunt asking if I could come and meet her where she works, and I agreed, and we met about 30 minutes afterwards. She asked me if I could look at the place where she worked because, well, she needs to leave to see her boyfriend. I asked why, and she explained that just before she called me, Dee had called her, and he and 2 of his friends, F and J, were on a road trip not far away from where we live, and they decided that they wanted to do a trip to shoot with some wind cheater guns for fun. They decided to drive to a point on a hill where a small bunker is. The bunker is so small, though, that only 2 people can enter it. It's only one room with windows fronting every direction. It's there because of World War II. We live on the border with Germany. And my aunt said that, for now, that's all she knows, and she needs to go to get them from there because somehow they can't leave or something. And then she added that all of them were scared to their cores, so she asked me to cover. So I stayed there to do her job and watch the shop and whatnot, which is a cigarette shop, and waited for them to come back. They got back in less than 10 minutes. As I said before, they were close to our location. When they left the car, my aunt's boyfriend sat in the front shop with his friends, and they were, like, pale from fear. When I say pale, too, I mean their faces were basically white, and they weren't saying any words. I waited patiently for them to tell me what happened, and one of his friends eventually started talking. So when they arrived at the spot, everything was fine. They went out of the car and started to prepare their air guns. They went on the roof of the bunker, which was around 1.5 meters high, and started to just shoot for fun. They were shooting rocks and trees and stuff like that, and no people were around because there are no houses there. As they finished, they started going down from the bunker, and it was in that moment when he noticed that something was really strange. Their car was standing there in plain sight around 10 meters from where they were shooting from. At first glance, nothing had changed, but Then he noticed that there were bricks piled up on the ground, up to the chassis of the car around every single wheel. It was like they drove straight into the middle of some kind of a wall, but don't forget that this was an area close to an old bunker with an old dirt road. What I mean is that there was like 0% possibility that they had not noticed it after leaving the car. But upon seeing this, all three of them went to the car and they locked themselves in. D was the one who was driving that day. He started the car normally, but the vehicle just couldn't move. Like, these little walls around the wheel were strong enough to prevent them from driving away. They all started panicking at that point. Jay ran out of the car and started to kick the bricks to set the car free and whatnot. At some point he was certain that it was enough and that the walls were destroyed to the point that they could leave now, so he got back in the car. D tried again, but now the car wouldn't even start. The third guy eventually called a friend from a city close to their location and asked if he could tow their car to the city. He agreed, and after 10 or 15 minutes he called them back. He was standing on the road down the hill and he could see them. At one stage too, he called them to ask for directions because somehow he couldn't find the way that led up the hill. And at some point he started screaming that something came out of the woods near them and is running right at their car. F said that the guy was screaming like he was afraid for his life. The only problem was that they weren't seeing anything. Nothing had left the woods, which they were all seeing right in front of them up close. And at this point, they're all sort of freaking out and everyone's sort of acting hectically. The funny thing is, though, is that the guy who was supposed to help them just hung up and ended up leaving. After a couple of minutes of shouting and straight up panic, they managed to stay quiet for a moment, just to try and hear if anything is walking nearby or something. And after a few seconds of silence, something knocked on the window of their car, and the knock sounded like it was made with some sort of a metal object. It was the window as well that was on the right side of the car, the window that was facing the forest. And after that, Dee called my aunt, and then she called me, and then she went out to get them as soon as I was at her job. Dee was really scared while telling us what happened, but that's not the strangest thing. The weirdest thing is that his two buddies were silent as a tomb. They hadn't spoken a word since they arrived at my aunt's job, and she told me a couple of weeks after that they were pretty strange after the incident. No one is talking about that day anymore, but I'm still really curious about what actually happened in that forest. When I was 18, I was in a severely abusive relationship. No one knew it from the outside, but my boyfriend at the time was just a monster. We had just spent the evening at my grandmother's house, handing out candy with her. I don't want him there, but he insisted that we go everywhere that I did because he was immensely controlling. After we'd finished up with the trick-or-treaters, he told me that he wanted to go to a neighboring town to see a movie. I had no choice but to agree, so off we went. He decided that he would drive my parents' new vehicle. I was not feeling particularly happy to be spending more time with him, so he started prodding me. We began to fight, and I told him that I didn't want to do this anymore. He sat calmly at a turning section, then jerked the wheel quickly and put my side into oncoming 80km/h traffic. We were almost immediately T-boned. I remember seeing a car coming at me and screaming. Then I was just knocked unconscious. The car had actually caught fire, and he had left me in the vehicle to presumably burn. He didn't even call 911 in the end. We were about 2 kilometers from my parents' rural house, and they had seen the commotion of the fire trucks, the ambulances, the police cars, etc. So they ventured out to see what was happening. I regained consciousness and started panicking upon seeing the smoke coming from the car. I was so dazed, but I was also on the verge of an anxiety attack, so I was freaking out. At this point, I remember hearing a woman's voice saying, "Shush, it's going to be okay. You're okay. Your mum is going to be here soon." I turned, and there were 2 older women with white hair and dressed in white, sitting in the back seat of the car. I had not seen either of them before, and for a town of a couple of hundred people, that was pretty surprising to me. Everyone literally knew everyone pretty much. But one lady didn't speak to me. The other kept soothing me and reassuring me. She handed me a white blanket and covered my lap and hands. I instantly calmed down, and the next time I regained consciousness, my mother had climbed into the driver's seat and was yelling at me to wake up and asked me what had happened. I was taken by an ambulance to the hospital, but I groggily told my mother of the women and gave her the blanket. She went to one of the cops on the scene and asked to meet the women and to thank them even. He just sort of looked at her puzzled, though, and said that he was apparently the first one on the scene. He also said that there was no way two elderly women could have gotten into the back seat of the vehicle. My mum kept the blanket, though, and she still has it in the cedar chest to this day. We don't talk about it as a family much, but I still think about it a lot.